Welcome to the Shudder. First, I want to say that the title of this video is not clickbait in any way. When I tell the last story on here, you'll see why. I had a couple of requests for Minnesota and Kansas encounters, so you'll hear those two first. The last one is from a man named Kevin, and when you hear it, some of you are probably going to shake your head in disbelief. Now, I talked to this man on the phone because I'm not telling any accounts on this channel that I don't believe to be genuine myself. He's not crazy. He's just a regular guy with nothing to gain from telling this story other than getting it off him and hoping, others will hear it and prompt them to maybe come forward with their highly strange encounters as well. When I talked to him, the first few minutes, all he could do was tell me, Carrie, I know this sounds crazy and out there. I probably wouldn't believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me. So, there you go. Oh, and not everybody's a writer. So just kind of keep that in mind when you hear some of these stories, especially these first two stories. I do my best to make them fit my style of narration without changing any of the story. Just please be respectful with the comments. I appreciate that. Okay, let's get started. Fluff up those couch cushions and settle in. I was driving home from Council Grove after getting a coffee and some cigarettes. It was just after daybreak, and the fog was kind of splotchy and lifting. I was driving slow, just enjoying the morning, and I saw something on the side of the road next to a cornfield, so I slowed down, thinking it was a deer. I still had my headlights on, and I could see perfectly. But what I saw was not a deer. It stood up to its full height, which I estimate to be about 8 feet, and looked right at me. It had an ear of corn in its hand, and I mean a hand like a human hand. It looked like a human being with hair all over him. I stopped my car and just stared at him as it did me. Then it took off and jumped the road in 2 large strides. It made it down the creek bank in just a few seconds. I was too afraid to look for footprints because I was by myself. I have told a few people about my sighting, but after I called and reported it to law enforcement and was laughed at, I haven't spoken of it to anyone else. I know Bigfoot exists, and I've tried for years to prove it, as my first experience was when I was a kid. The place I found tracks back then is only a few miles from this sighting. I grew up in the country, and on the same creek the creature ran off to that day. I don't know if you all are serious and will believe me, but I feel better getting this off my chest and telling someone I hope will not laugh at me. No one's laughing at you, I promise. I still find it amazing that it was eating corn like that. I would love to get involved with a group to help prove they exist. I'm a total believer now. I still can't get over how human it looked. The fur and hair was long in some spots, but shorter around the face and eyes. I have thought about it a lot, and I have drawn it out on paper many times. I thank you for having this forum to let me tell my story. Around the first week in October of last year, I had decided to go out squirrel hunting since it was such a nice day. I went out to a piece of land we had previously owned and have retained the hunting rights to. I had just left my truck and headed down into the woods. I was checking out a large rock overhang formation when something moving to my right about 200 feet away caught my eye. I was looking through rather thick brush separated by a barbed wire fence, a creek bed, and lots of vegetation. At first, all I could make out was something that appeared to be a very large black turkey flapping its wings in a very strange but fast manner. I moved around to the right a little bit to try and get a better look when all of a sudden, this thing gets up on 2 feet and starts running unnaturally fast. It had no more gotten up when suddenly another one, much larger and reddish-brown in color, jumped up behind it and ran like it was trying to catch up to the black one. It appeared to almost fall forward, all the while moving very, very fast and disappearing just as quickly. It moved amazingly quiet through some of the thickest brush down there. I think I was frozen stiff in disbelief, trying to gather what I had just seen. I stood there, dazed for about a minute, and decided to cross the barbed wire fence and creek bed and go over to where I had seen them get up and run. Once I got over there, I found indentations in the soft, grassy, almost marsh-like terrain, but no real discernible tracks. What is interesting is that what I thought I had seen as a turkey flapping its wings was probably the black animal sitting or kneeling and reaching up for chokecherries on the tree it was nearby. I followed their brief trail right up to where they entered the thick brush and decided not to go any further. I thought that if two creatures so huge could go through that thick brush so quietly, how would I ever know they hadn't circled back and were watching me from behind? I got spooked at that thought and got out of there. I told my wife what I saw and the friend of ours we had sold the land to. I think they believed I saw something, but not Bigfoot, which is what I believe them to be. My friends and I started out gun hunting in high school, but found the wildlife management areas a little on the scary side. We had several discouraging encounters with crazy, drunken gun hunters, if you can call them hunters. We then switched to archery, which was much better for us overall. One of our favorite hunting spots was in the panhandle of Florida. We saved a week of vacation to spend in the middle of one of Florida's largest management areas. We hunted there a total of 6 years in the mid to late 80s and 2 years in the mid 90s. In the 80s, we would put a hammock up between two trees about 60 yards from our tent. We had several strange occurrences throughout those years, but nothing stranger than my time in the 80s sleeping in the hammock. My first hammock encounter happened on a beautiful October day. We sometimes used the time between morning and evening hunts to relax. My friend liked to sleep in the tent, so I gladly took the hammock. I remember the temperature was around 80 degrees. There was a slight wind, and the sky was sparsely clouded. I would stare at the sky and think how lucky I was to be there. I usually took advantage of this time to thank God for my life and good fortune. It wasn't long before I was sound asleep. I guess it was after an hour or so of sleep that I abruptly sat up in the hammock. I don't know why I reacted like that, because this was not normal for me. I sat up, opened my eyes, and I found myself face to face with a hairy creature that reminded me of a real-life Tasmanian devil. The creature had a shocked look on its face. It made a slight noise, dropped down, and scrambled away faster than I believed possible on all fours. The creature stood about 5.5 feet tall, had messy, medium brown hair that spiked on top of its head. It had large brown eyes and shaggy hair all over its face, except around the nose and eyes. I was completely caught off guard and in a state of disbelief. I wondered if I was dreaming. I gave myself a couple of hard slaps to the face and shook my head. Even though the slaps to the face proved I wasn't sleeping, I wrote this event off as a dream or my imagination. There was just no way something like this creature could exist or could ever be that fast in my mind. I didn't want my friend to think I was nuts, so I didn't tell him about what I saw. My second hammock encounter was just 2 days later. It's hard to believe, even for me. I promise I'm not crazy, even though it sounds crazy. Again, I was enjoying my afternoon in the hammock. Just like the first time, I sprang up from a sound sleep. This time, I had a strange and uneasy feeling, so I started looking all around. I got a glimpse of something or someone standing about 30 feet away, partially hidden behind some bushes. At the same time, I heard a voice asking me not to be afraid. The voice was a female voice, and she repeated her plea a couple of more times as she slowly approached me. I told her I wasn't afraid, but I don't remember my mouth moving. My voice sounded normal to me, like it does when I use my mouth, but I'm sure I wasn't talking out loud. For some reason, the sensation didn't bother me at all, and I wasn't at all bothered by the strange-looking being moving in front of me. She stopped about 10 feet away and turned towards me. We stared at each other for a short while. I don't remember how long. I knew she wasn't human, but at the same time, I felt at ease with what I was looking at. She was an amazing creature with large almond-shaped eyes and long eyelashes. To give you a sense of proportion, her eyes were close to 3 times bigger than any person I'd ever seen. She stood about 6 feet tall and was completely covered with dark brown hair. The hair on top of her head was long and draped down in front of her, almost dragging the ground. Her facial hair was about 1 to 2 inches long and stood straight out. Each hair on her face was brown at the base, turning to black at the tip, giving her a well-kept appearance. Her body was straight with no figure as far as I could tell. Her lower body was shaped like a penguin, with her belly coming down low and about covering the top of her legs. It looked like her shape would make it hard for her to move, but from the front, it looked like she was gliding when she walked. Her posture and the way she spoke gave her a feel of someone full of pride and raised with proper etiquette. I asked her if she lived here, and she said yes. We introduced ourselves, but I can't remember the name she used. She then moved to my right and sat behind a palmetto bush. At that point, I could only see her hairy legs and feet. She explained that she felt more comfortable being hidden. We had a conversation that lasted about 5 minutes and was all one way, with her asking the questions. She asked why we were there. I explained that we lived in the city and used our vacation time to get away from the busy lifestyle. She was starting to ask me about my friend and said that he wasn't like me. She said she thought he was a bad man. The remainder of that conversation was about him, and all I could do is defend him and try to convince her that he was a good man. At the end, she got up rather abruptly and walked away. She said as she was leaving that she enjoyed our conversation and that maybe we could speak again someday. When she was out of sight, I checked myself to see if I was awake. I sat in the hammock for at least another 15 minutes trying to get my head around what just happened. I knew this was not normal and that I couldn't tell anyone what I'd just witnessed. When I got back to camp, my friend was getting his gear ready for the evening hunt. I didn't like lying to him, but I told him it was a dream. This allowed me to talk about it without having sound like a crazy person. My third hammock encounter was the next day and started with the same jolt from a sound sleep. I immediately saw the female being I had met earlier standing in a clearing about 30 feet to my left. She told me that she mentioned me to her parents and that they wanted to meet me. At that time, a being came out from behind her and into the clearing, stopping at her right side. She introduced this creature as her mother. As I looked at the mother, I became somewhat disturbed at what I was seeing, but suppressed the urge to show it. I was looking at a being 2 times taller than the daughter, which would make her around 12 feet tall. Her hair and skin were uniform tan color. The eyes were small and black, and looked almost fake, like looking at a doll. The hair on her head was a thick mass of tan curls. Her body was shaped very much like her daughter's, with the same straight figure and lower body that reminded me of a penguin, the way the belly drooped, almost hiding the legs. After we looked at each other for a minute, the daughter said her father would be along shortly. She said he was making sure things were safe before showing himself. The mother started to speak, and again her mouth didn't move, but what I heard was a female voice. She explained that the reason they wanted to meet me was because it was extremely rare to meet someone like me. She went on to compliment me for being a good man and that I should be proud. The daughter agreed with her and then said her father was coming now. A few seconds later, her father came out into the clearing and stopped at the daughter's left side, putting the daughter between the 2 parents. The father was a few feet shorter than the mother, so I would say he stood about 10 feet tall. He had dark brown hair that covered his entire body except for his nose, which made it stand out. He had a brow line that covered his eyes, so I couldn't say how they were shaped or what color they were. He had a hooded nose and a large mouth. His head seemed to sit on his wide shoulders with no visible neck. He had long arms that hung down close to his knees. His legs were huge with thick hair. I didn't seem to have much trouble looking at him as I did the mother because he reminded me of a big teddy bear. After a few seconds of looking at each other, he started to speak. Again, his mouth didn't move, but the voice I heard was male. He told me that he was glad to meet me and how rare I was. He complimented me for being a good man, like I was the only one he had ever seen. I was somewhat embarrassed at such attention, so I decided to compliment both of them on raising a very polite daughter. As I complimented their daughter, I noticed that I was very at ease, and the words seemed to flow from me better than I could normally put them together. Again, I don't believe I was speaking out loud. The meeting ended right after I spoke, with short goodbyes as they disappeared back into the woods. These encounters were the first and last of this type in my life. I think back on it now and think it's possible that they somehow knew when my friend was about to wake. I believe this may be why they left so quickly, but how did they know? Did they have a lookout watching him and signaling to them? Could they sense him waking with some kind of natural instinct? Why were they worried about my friend, and how did they know he was a bad man? Maybe one day we will get to know these answers. I never felt threatened during any of these accounts. Knowing what I know now, they could have killed us any time they wanted. I guess this may be why I was willing or able to dismiss what I experienced as dreams or my imagination. I want to end this by saying that I believe these creatures are flesh and blood. I just think they have abilities we either don't have or have grown out of over the centuries. How incredible was that? Now, that's not the first time I've heard of people speaking to these creatures with their mind. It's just the first time I've heard of anyone looking at the creature they were talking to. Absolutely incredible. Okay, I'll be working on more submissions and getting them out as soon as I can. I thank you for listening, and if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.